Over the past month or so, a disinformation campaign has flooded into the comment sections on social media platforms and news outlets alike. Did Russia actually manage to destroy a secret NATO command center, hidden dozens of meters below Ukraine, using their hypersonic Kinzhal missile? No, but Russian trolls sure do want you to think that they did. So just in case this one hasn't reached you yet, let's take the knees out from under this disinfo campaign before it finds its way into the phone in your hand. I'm Alex Hollings, and this is Air Power. I really try to read through all the comments on my YouTube videos, my TikTok posts, and my published articles, and that gives me the opportunity to see narratives surface in real time. Now, sometimes when I see narratives that aren't factually accurate surface, they're legitimate misinformation. And what I mean by misinformation is that they're the result of honest misunderstandings or misconceptions that are shared by enough of the population to become prevalent narratives. A lot of times, misinformation is born out of people not reading beyond hyperbolic headlines, or when prominent figures who don't really know what they're talking about share their opinions, and other folks just sort of latch onto it because it seems like it makes sense. Misinformation, of course, isn't uncommon, but it also isn't inherently nefarious. But disinformation, in other words, false information that's being spread intentionally, often is. Disinformation, or disinfo, has long been and still is the tool of choice for foreign campaigns aimed at swaying your opinion, your position, or your beliefs about specific topics. And while every nation has dabbled in disinfo, no nation is as renowned for its distribution of false narratives than Russia. So I'm going to ask you guys to bear with me a bit this week, because I'm recording this here on Friday morning, and I'm going to try to edit this video very quickly, probably with a lot of footage that doesn't quite sync up with what I'm saying, to get this video out this afternoon. But the reason for that is that over the past few weeks, every one of my videos, every one of my articles has been flooded with comments from Russian bots, trolls, and useful idiots trying to advance this fake news narrative that there was a NATO bunker in Ukraine that Russia took out with a Kinzhal missile. At first, when these comments started pouring in, I just chalked it up to good old-fashioned misinformation, someone misinterpreting a headline or something like that. But as the comments became more frequent and shared the same language, I came to realize that there was a concerted narrative effort at play here. Now, I know there's a chance that you may not have even been exposed to this narrative yet if you're watching this video now, but as a new flood of these comments poured into my TikTok account last night, I decided that I wanted to figure out where it was coming from. And what I learned in my internet travels sheds a great deal of light on how these narratives are formed and how they're leveraged. And I thought I would whip up a quick video to not only equip you to counter this narrative when you come across it in the wild, but also to help you understand how these narratives come to be in the first place. But disclaimer up front, I stayed up all night doing this research and I don't have a script. I've just got a bunch of scribbled notes in a notebook. So please bear with me in terms of my delivery and my video choices. I'm trying to do this as quick as I can. So without any further ado, let's dive into this story, because all throughout the month of March, prominent Russian social media accounts, blogging sites, and even a few TV shows broadcast by Russian state media all began claiming that Russia had launched their highly publicized Kh-47M2 Kinzhal at a secret NATO bunker somewhere in the Ukrainian city of Lviv. Now, if you've been to this channel before, you almost certainly already know that Russia's Kinzhal missile is an air-launched ballistic missile that Russia often characterizes as a modern hypersonic weapon for which the West has no means of defense. And that's an important part of this narrative. Now, these varied reports and social media posts offered a wide variety of conflicting details about this alleged strike, but the consistent overarching narrative contends that this bunker that was taken out by the Kinzhal missile, which was supposedly as deep as 130 meters, or more than 425 feet feet below ground, housed hundreds of NATO personnel tasked with control of Ukraine's Western air defense systems. According to these claims, the strike killed as many as 300 people, most of which were American, Polish, or British, depending on your source, including at least 40 high-ranking NATO officials. Now, most of the stories, posts, or comments that you'll find about this alleged missile strike will claim that it took place on either March 8th or March 9th, which would coincide with a number of Russian missile strikes that did include Kinzhal missiles. But here's the thing, the earliest mention of this missile strike, at least in English, actually dates back to more than a week before it allegedly occurred, all the way back to March 1st, published by an Australian conspiracy blog, in between stories about COVID vaccine cover-ups and how it's scientifically proven that vegans are dumb. Now, this same article goes on to claim that it's been proven that the US and Norway secretly worked together to bomb the Nord Stream pipeline, and that the US and EU were plotting sanctions on Russia months prior to the invasion of Ukraine, which is sort of true because they saw the invasion coming. But this part of the story does offer a source, and for some reason they cite a gynecologist. Now, the story goes on to claim that this alleged NATO bunker was 80 meters below ground, and it may have been the originator of the 300 dead and 40 high-ranking foreign specialist figures that are often repeated in later reports. It was the first time I saw these numbers used. Now, at the time, it doesn't look as though this story caught on, but on March 9th, another conspiracy theory-centered website called The Intel Drop published some of the exact same text, just copied and pasted, into a larger write-up about this claimed incident. Now, this story goes on to apparently quote Yuri Ignat, a representative of the Ukrainian Air Force, and within that alleged quote, Ignat describes hypersonic weapons as weapons capable of exceeding Mach 10, which we know isn't true, but is a mistake that really could have happened. And then he adds that there has never been such a dangerous rival. Now, I want to be clear that it's entirely possible that this quote is real, but my efforts to find any substantiation for it only produced other pro-Russian blogs, most prominently a site called Veterans Today, or VT Foreign Policy, and that's going to come up again here in just a minute. Now, to give the Intel Drop as fair a shake as I can, it describes itself as an unaligned news source for the intelligence and financial community, but I'm not so sure about that unaligned part. I mean, alongside this story about this alleged Kinzhal strike on a NATO bunker, the Intel Drop homepage features stories about American nuclear weapons technology being smuggled into Ukraine, and the United Nations seeking to legalize some very upsetting crimes toward children. Now, the Intel Drop's domain ownership has been redacted for privacy, but the site does list an American man named Gordon Duff as a member of its board of directors. So I looked into Duff, and it turns out he appears to be a US Marine veteran just like me, and he served in Vietnam just like my dad. But since then, he's become a well-known conspiracy theorist, and he also happened to be the previous chairman of that aforementioned Veterans Today website that's sharing the same story and the same quotes that I can't find anywhere else. And wouldn't you know it, a Politico investigation into Duff and Veterans Today found a 2012 interview in which Duff openly admitted that the site publishes false information. I'll quote Duff himself. About 30% of what's written on Veterans Today is patently false. About 40% of what I write is at least purposely partially false, because if I didn't write false information, I wouldn't be alive. Now, Veterans Today's story about this alleged Kinzhal strike actually has something going for it none of the previous coverage does. It lists an author, a man named Jonas E. Alexis, who's listed as a senior editor for the outlet. Now, Alexis is a noted Holocaust denier, and he's written many articles for Kremlin-linked outlets, including a number of stories about how Vladimir Putin has been vilified by the West because he's opposed to the Satan-worshipping New World Order. Now, despite these glaring red flags, this unsubstantiated story about a Russian Kinzhal missile taking out a secret NATO headquarters hidden hundreds of feet below ground in Ukraine quickly began making the rounds on Twitter and Telegram as soon as these stories went live. with some prominent Russian-based social media accounts even claiming that the NATO base was actually in Kyiv instead, but I can't tell if that was intentional or just some misinformation that branched out from this disinfo campaign. But it wasn't until March 12th that this story really got spinning, thanks to yet another conspiracy-focused website purporting to be a news outlet, this time Greece's ProNews. Now, I obviously wasn't familiar with ProNews, but as luck would have it, both my managing editor and my features editor at Sandbox News are Greek military veterans. So I asked them, and neither of them had ever actually read any ProNews content, but they did tell me that it's got a very bad reputation. So not a great start for ProNews. Now, despite how much traction ProNews' coverage of this alleged strike got, they actually publish content on a wide variety of non-defense topics. Things like Nostradamus predictions that came true and a woman who married a ghost. Now, the Greek independent fact-checking organization Ellenika Hoaxes, which I may have just mispronounced, is accredited by the International Fact-Checking Network, and they identify ProNews as a fake news website. As of June 2020, they had already identified some 232 articles published by ProNews that they had proven to be either false or disinformative. And again, importantly, disinformative means intentionally misleading, whereas misinformative would be unintentional. And in keeping with this sort of disinfo game of telephone, the claims about the Kinzhal's capabilities, the value of the NATO bunker destroyed, and the number of NATO officials in this story all got a nice boost when translated into Greek. However, unlike previous claims, this new story added British officials into the mix of dead NATO personnel. Now, I'm going to go ahead and just read you some of the coverage, since this is the version of the story that got the most traction. Quote, Russian hypersonic Kinzhal missile with a target impact speed of Mach 12, 12 times the speed of sound, managed to hit the Ukrainian NATO Joint Command, Control, and Communication Center installed at a depth of 130 meters. The underground headquarters, built 400 feet underground, housed a number of NATO officials and reportedly housed over 300 people. The Russians say that they have pulled 40 dead from the wreckage of the underground headquarters so far, but most will never be recovered as they were buried by the debris. It is unknown how many Westerners and how many Ukrainians were killed in the attack, but it is the first time that the West has counted so many dead, including officers and non-commissioned officers. Most are British and Polish, but among them were Americans and members of private companies supporting communications and data transmission. Now, if it sounds like I gave a bit of an unfair flourish to that quote, you should know that the exclamation points were right there in the write-up, and I may not be good at everything, but I can follow stage direction. Now, an investigation into ProNews' claims, mounted by the Ukraine-based outlet Gwara Media, found that the story itself had been changed on the site at least twice, without any notes indicating changes. And for those who aren't aware, it's common practice among reputable news outlets to note changes or corrections so as not to gaslight your readers. Gwara Media also noted that the story added words to actual quotes made by Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky to help substantiate their claims, as well as citing unnamed American sources. Now, despite the credibility of this website, this Greek story saw far wider distribution than any of the previous posts, and importantly, far more citations, despite not offering any real source for its information or even citing any of the previous reporting from other similarly disreputable websites. It seems as though ProNews was trying to treat this story as though it was breaking, claiming that the strike took place on March 9th, notably 9 days after the first reports of such a strike reached the internet. And importantly, Russian statements about the missile strikes that did take place on March 9th make absolutely no mention of any NATO bunker being targeted or existing at all. But the fact that this story was published by a foreign news outlet out of a NATO nation was enough for state-run Russian television programs to pick up on it and report this Kinzhal bunker strike as though it was absolute reality. However, despite being picked up by Russian television, no Russian officials or Kremlin statements have ever been made to substantiate it. But to the general television-watching audience in Russia, none of that matters, because as soon as it was reported by news anchors, it became real. It was at this point that other prominent Russian media outlets picked up the story, often citing ProNews directly as the source of the information and highlighting that the outlet comes from a member of NATO itself. But even these reports, like the ones published by Russia's Pravda.ru, make small changes to the story, potentially to make it seem a bit more believable. Pravda's coverage, for instance, changed the depth from 130 meters to 120. But importantly, even these outlets highlight the fact that there's been no official corroboration for the whole claim. Even propaganda outlets like Top War openly question the reliability of these claims because they directly contradict previous propaganda claims. I'll quote Top War's Alexander Grigoriev now. The author claims that this is the first such effective strike against the headquarters with foreign specialists and NATO military personnel. Such a statement raises doubts about the reliability of the information because, as you know, last year the Russian Federation Armed Forces already inflicted a defeat on a well-protected command post of the Armed Forces of Ukraine using the Dagger complex. Dagger complex meaning the Kinzhal missile. And as soon as this mainstream Russian coverage broke, the story saw a massive resurgence on social media, now often accompanied by an image that propagandists claim was of the strike itself. But just like this whole story, the image has a history that dates back to before this strike allegedly took place at all. A reverse image search of the photograph clearly shows that it was taken after a Russian airstrike in Syria in 2021. Now, just in case it isn't exceedingly evident to you by now that this is a make-believe story that got picked up by prominent Russian outlets because it benefits a number of ongoing Russian narratives, let's go over a few more of these details a bit more closely to highlight where the logic just doesn't line up. First and foremost, it's incredible that this story got as much traction as it has and continues to get on the global internet and mainstream Russian media, despite the fact that the Kremlin has yet to make a single statement to substantiate any part of it. In fact, no Russian official has even acknowledged this claim about a Kinzhal strike on a NATO bunker to date. It's not exactly like the Kremlin's got a reputation for honesty, and it goes without saying that if this story were somehow real, it would be a pretty big deal. But the evidence that this is all make-believe runs deeper than just Russia's own omission. Lviv, the alleged site of this secret NATO bunker, is notably close to the Polish border. It just doesn't make a great deal of sense for NATO to place hundreds of personnel in a hugely expensive secret underground bunker that's so close to territory that they could just operate in freely. But an even bigger geographical red flag is the fact that all of these stories talk about Russian troops pulling 40 bodies out of this destroyed bunker, when the closest Russian troop position is about 1,000 kilometers, or 620 or so miles away. There are no Russian troops anywhere even close to where this alleged strike took place to confirm anything about an underground bunker or a death toll, let alone pulling anything out of the rubble. Now, as we already discussed, this story hit the internet on March 1st or even earlier, but on the night of March 8th and in the early morning of March 9th, Russia really did launch a number of Kinzhal missiles at Ukraine, and Lviv really was one of the targets. And it seems as though this story just got a kick in the pants as soon as there were headlines that you could tie it to. But here's the thing, Ukrainian officials and local media outlets from the region were talking about and covering this strike from the moment it happened. And there's good reason for that. It's because this Kinzhal missile wasn't targeting a secret underground bunker. Instead, it hit a residential apartment building. It started a fire that spread to some other structures and ultimately killed at least 5 civilians. None of the structures hit were secret subterranean bunkers, and there are images and videos from the aftermath of this strike readily available all over the internet. Now, if I were Russia trying to manage my international reputation, or if I were just a person supporting Russia in this conflict, I know that I'd certainly prefer believing, or having you believe, that Russia was targeting a secret underground bunker, rather than acknowledge that Russia, the nation that started this invasion, the nation that claims it's just trying to demilitarize Ukraine, the nation with the massive military advantage and numerical superiority, chose to use its latest and greatest, allegedly unbeatable and indefensible hypersonic missile to just target civilians again. But unfortunately, when you cut through all the chatter and the static and the claims made in comment sections and in conspiracy blogs and in Russia's own state media, that's exactly what you find. So the next time you see a commenter claiming that Russia used a hypersonic Kinzhal missile to take out a secret NATO bunker hidden beneath Lviv, you should know that they're doing more than just trying to talk up how tough Russia's military is. Whether they know it or not, they're part of a larger, concerted effort to help Russia save face while they actively target civilians as they try to break Ukraine's will. Heck, when you see people pushing this narrative, feel free to just reply with this video. The reach will help me out, and it'll probably take the wind right out of their sails. And with that ends this very short-fused edition of Air Power from Sandbox News. I'm Alex Hollings. Make sure to swing by sandboxnews.com today and every day for all the latest in news, entertainment, and motivation from all around the Force. If you got anything out of today's video, make sure to click like and subscribe down below, and leave me a comment so I know what I should cover next. Lord knows, plenty of Russian trolls will. And don't forget to tap on that bell icon so you never miss a drop from Sandbox News.